Hey, Jay, it's Patrick from near Dallas. I was going to call in with just a couple of things. One on the most recent episode where you talked about Republican taxation plans and Brownback's miracle in Kansas. It just blows my mind because if you look back at the whole basis for the idea of the reduction in taxes being successful, right? The idea wasn't to just reduce taxes. The idea was that if taxes were too high, right, that you would inhibit people's desire to work. And it's the whole Laffer curve where he drew it out on a napkin, right? So it's a bell-shaped curve. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe someone's talking about this and I'm just missing it, but no one seems to be talking about this. So obviously, if you tax everybody at 100%, then no one is very motivated because all their handouts then depend on the government. That's kind of the Soviet system. And if you tax people at 0%, the government doesn't make any money and it can't provide any services, right? So the idea is that the curve was drawn as the sort of bell shape. So somewhere between 0 and 100%, there's an ideal taxation that will also provide, theoretically, a minimum burden on the individual. And that was the whole purpose behind this, is that if you went back to the 70s and the taxation where the top tax brackets, were up in the 70 or some of the capital gain stuff was really high. I noticed my parents had some land that they sold at that time, and like they were supposed to turn over 90% of the profit to the government. They'd worked on this stuff for years. They were very distraught that that's how this works. So they had to immediately reinvest it in another property. That all aside, there's some ideal taxation. It's not that it should be driven to zero. So obviously, Kansas overshot. They need to go back. The actual tax burden that sort of maximizes the amount of available funds the government needs may be higher than most people want. And what we should argue about is how it's best distributed, but the answer is not always lower. So the second thing is, because many of your listeners are sciencey people or enjoy like logical applications of, common sense to real world problems, I would like to highly recommend a book that I don't know if you've talked about. It's not a political book. It's a book called How Not to Be Wrong. It's on the power of mathematical reasoning in everyday life. And many of the examples, though, that he does use in the book show how mathematical application of sort of common sense principles to politics can lead to answers that don't seem to be right, but mathematically can be shown to be correct. So for one example, you can have 3 candidates running for an office, and each candidate is disliked by 2/3 of the population. So nobody really is a winner in this situation. And then who gets elected, and how do you best determine these sort of multiple run elections? How do you determine, first alternate choice? All of this, but he looks at the mathematical logic behind all of that. So anyway, as well as a lot of other fun, nerdy math stuff, if you're into that, which I am. So enjoyable read, How Not to Be Wrong. And I don't understand this sort of, even old-timey conservative economists would argue that there's an ideal rate, not that it's always lower. And how common sense is totally left the Republican Party is just beyond me. There used to be several conservative people that I could respect or agree to disagree with, and there's still several individuals, but hard to find anyone in elected office that meets that criteria anymore. So next book I'm going to read, Idiot America. So anyway, enjoy all of that. Great podcast. As always, just keep looking for lights in the darkness. Talk to you later, Jay.